Let's now illustrate the effects of comparative advantage and the implications it has for what good the country specializes in. So we have an example here where it shows you how much tea you can produce and how much coffee you could produce if, let's say, you're part of India, if you were using all your resources. So this is how much tea you can produce, that's how much coffee you can produce. If you're producing that much tea, you're producing a zero amount of coffee. If you're producing that much coffee, you're producing a zero amount of tea. So you're using all your resources in tea production and all your resources in coffee production. That illustrates a production possibility frontier such as this. That's 162. This is 54. This is India. Notice the straight line in the production possibility frontier illustrating constant opportunity costs. And the same thing for Brazil. You can work out their production possibility frontier. So if they're using all their resources for tea, this is tea, that's coffee. If they're using all their resources for tea, they will produce 216 units of tea and 108 units of coffee. Notice once again the straight line in the production possibility frontier. That's showing that they will produce 216 units of tea with 0 units of coffee if they use all their resources there. But they can produce 108 units of coffee with 0 units of tea if they produce at a point such as there. So this is the typical type of example that you would get. Now let's have a look and try and understand comparative advantage and specialization. Firstly, which country has an absolute advantage in tea production? By absolute advantage, you're just seeing whether using all those resources, you can produce more tea than the other country. So who has an absolute advantage in tea production? Brazil has an absolute advantage since they can produce more tea than India. And that's all absolute advantage refers to, just because they can produce more tea than India. Who has an absolute advantage in coffee production? Once again, Brazil has an absolute advantage in coffee production. They can produce more coffee than India can using all their resources. So we've seen that Brazil has an absolute advantage in both goods. But now we're going to try and work out their comparative advantage. You will see in this analysis that the comparative advantage will be different for two different countries. So one country will have a comparative advantage in producing tea or coffee, and the other one will have a comparative advantage in producing the other good. So how can we work out the comparative advantage? You work out the comparative advantage by looking at the opportunity costs of each good in each country. So firstly, let's work out the opportunity cost of, let's say, tea in India. Tea in India. It's equal to how much coffee you would have to forgo to produce 1 unit of tea. Now, to produce 162 units of tea, you would forgo 54 kilograms of coffee production. So, but we need it in terms of 1 unit of tea production. So, opportunity cost of tea is how much coffee must you forgo in production to produce 1 unit of tea. So, why don't we divide both by 162? So, if you've got 162 over 162 is equal to 1. So this will give you your 1 unit of tea. But therefore we look at the 54 divided by 162, which is equal to 0.333. Great. So that's just an aside. To work out the opportunity cost of tea in India, you take the amount of coffee divided by the amount of tea and it'll give you 0.333 kilograms. That makes sense. So to produce 1 unit of tea, you have to forgo the production of 0.333 kilograms of coffee. So to find out the opportunity cost of coffee in India, you take the 162 of kilograms of tea divided by the 54 so that you can standardize it. So 162 divided by 54 is equal to 3 kilograms of tea. So the opportunity cost of coffee means that for you to produce 1 unit of coffee, you need to forego production of 3 units of tea, or 3 kilograms of tea. So that's how you work out the opportunity cost of coffee in India. Let's do the same for Brazil. Opportunity cost of tea in Brazil is equal to, well, for tea in Brazil, you have to standardize that value of tea down to 1 so that you can see how much coffee you would have to forgo to produce 1 kilogram of tea. So you divide that by 216 and you divide that by 216, so it's 108 divided by 216, which is equal to a half. So 0.5 kilograms of coffee is your opportunity cost of tea in Brazil. So to produce 1 kilogram of tea in Brazil, you have to forego production of half a kilogram of coffee. And then the opportunity cost of coffee in Brazil is equal to, well, you have to standardize the coffee value. So you want to get it in terms of 1 kilogram of coffee. How much tea do you have to give up in terms of producing 1 kilogram of coffee? So you divide 216 by 108, which is equal to 2 kilograms of tea. So the opportunity cost of coffee in Brazil is 2 kilograms of tea. To produce an extra kilogram of coffee in Brazil, you must forego production of 2 kilograms of tea.